Hello everyone, welcome. It's Friday again. This is Michaela Conley, HP CareerNet, and today is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to have slides, but I did prepare a few slides just sort of as an introductory kind of thing. We got Alfie Kohn, and we also have Rosie Ward. Dr. Rosie Ward is the Health Management Services Manager with RJF Agencies, where she helps organizations create a healthy and engaging culture by shifting their approach to align health and well-being initiatives with strategic business objectives. She has over 17 years' experience in a variety of settings. Dr. Ward holds a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, a Master of Public Health degree in community health education, and a PhD in organizational management, where she focused on organizational culture and transformational intrinsic motivation and coaching. Dr. Ward is a national speaker, regularly interviewed as an expert for business publications, and is a contributing author to Organizational Development in Healthcare, High-Impact Practices for a Complex and Changing Environment, to be published in March of 2011. Thanks so much for your help here, Rosie. Rosie was part of the reason how I ended up connecting with you. I also, a few weeks ago, heard you speak on sort of education reform, and the stars aligned, and it seemed to me that with all the controversy over incentives and the HIPAA and the health reform bill, that talking about the things that you are obviously very passionate about, the time was now. So let me just say, for those of you who aren't tremendously familiar, or maybe you are, and you need to include some more books in your reading, on your reading list or your library, Alfie is just a prolific author on topics of incentives, human behavior, education. I'm probably forgetting something, but I just wanted to kind of run through this, these books, which I pulled off of your website: Standardized Testing, Parenting. Love the idea of the debunking conventional wisdom, because we certainly do put a lot of time and energy into maintaining status quo, even though we know it's not working so well. Classrooms, children, homework myth. Gosh, if I'd only known about that a long time ago, my life could have been different. And I just also grabbed the dates that Alfie is going to be in different parts of the country here: Minnesota, Canada, San Francisco, all over the place. So obviously I am beyond thrilled that you were able to share your time with us. Oh, I know, I wanted to also show, oops, I did it wrong. Snagged rabbit. I wanted to show the front of your web page, which is right there, alfiekohn.org, which is where you can get all this good information. So I'm going to stop talking now. At least I'll start talking less. Alfie, are you ready to?
I am.
Ready to go?
Ready to start talking more.
Okay, I think you should.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the people attending. I'm delighted to be speaking out into what still feels like a void. I can't entirely get used to this medium, even though I've done a few of these. I would encourage you to type questions or responses as I'm speaking, and I will be able to glance at that. Sometimes I will defer till a little bit later to respond, but I may incorporate a response to your questions in my remarks, since I am looking at a screen, as most of you are. Then later on, I would encourage you to speak up in an audio fashion, if you would like, to ask a question or give a response as well. So the topic today deals with a kind of debunking, really, and that has to do with our cultural dependence on a model of motivation that leads us to try to reward people into doing things, in this case, into becoming healthier. I sometimes, when I do an ordinary, that is to say an old-fashioned presentation where I can see people and they can see me in the same room, I like to begin with a sort of thought challenge, which I'd like to try to do now, even though we won't do it in an organized way where I will elicit your responses. There are many studies on this topic, and I'm going to review some of them. But there's one that I particularly like just to get people thinking about it, and it has to do with a beverage that a researcher introduced to a bunch of children. The beverage is called kefir, K-E-F-I-R, and wellness-oriented people may recognize that as basically like liquid yogurt. The kids were divided into 3 conditions. Some of them were just asked to drink it. Some of them were praised for drinking it, as in, good girl, you drank all the way down to the bottom. And the third group was promised movie tickets if they drank it. Now, most of us, I think, would predict that kids who got either praise or movie tickets would be likely to drink more of the stuff than kids who got nothing. And that is exactly what happened. But what interested the researchers was not what the kids did right then, but what happened a week later when they came back with the stuff. And it turned out that the kids who got no reward for drinking this unfamiliar beverage liked it as much or slightly more than they had originally. But the kids who got the tangible reward, the movie tickets, and contrary to hypothesis, always wake up when you hear that phrase, the kids who got the verbal reward, the good job, no longer wanted to touch the stuff. Now, the kefir was the same, of course, in all 3 conditions, and the kids were extremely similar in all 3 conditions. The only difference was that when kids were given a tangible or verbal reward for drinking this stuff, it made them less interested in it. It made the beverage less appealing. Now, if we were in a room, I would ask you to turn to somebody next to you, say hello, and see if you can come up with a hypothesis. But we can't exactly do that now. I expect many of you are there individually rather than in small groups. But I would ask you simply to think for a moment about why that might be true. Why is it that rewarding kids for doing this, for drinking this stuff, would make them, so to speak, less motivated to do it later when there's no reward anymore? I think there is no single right answer to this question, but they're merely to get you to construct knowledge around the finding, that is to figure out from the inside out what's going on here, can be more useful than just telling you what the finding is. I'm going to circle back to possible reasons in a few minutes, but right now I want to suggest that there are 2 questions where health promotion is concerned that I want to address for the next hour. The first question is, do incentives work if we get them right? And the second question is, why not? And I want to do this in several parts. First, I want to very quickly review general research about rewards. Second, I want to review research on health. Third, I want to try to explain the results. And then finally, I want to begin a process, and I do this very tentatively, to think about if rewards don't work, what might. And here I defer to many of you who know much more about that topic than I do. So let me start with the general research. And let me begin by acknowledging that rewards, like punishments, can be effective at getting one thing and only one thing. And that is temporary compliance. If I showed up at your door and said, take off your shoes right now or I'm going to hit you with this baseball bat, I think you would probably take off your shoes. See, punishments, consequences, as we prefer to think of them, so we don't feel bad about making other people feel bad, can work. But what if I said, I'll give you $1,000, here it is, I'm flashing my bills, if you take off your shoes? Would you do it? Once again, I think you probably would. Rewards, like punishments, can get people to do something. But what rewards and punishments can never do is help people develop a commitment to a given behavior, because it doesn't get at the needs, the motives, the reasons, the values that underlie our behavior. And so here's what we find when we look at the research overall. First, if we're interested in achievement or performance in the workplace or the classroom, rewards in general tend to lead to lower performance, especially when the tasks require some degree of creativity or out-of-the-box thinking. If I took 100 people and I gave them all some kind of problem to solve or puzzle to work out, and half of them were just told, see if you can figure this out, and the other half were promised a reward either for doing the task or for doing it well, the people in the second group, the reward condition, tend to do a poorer job. Rewards undermine achievement. This has been shown since the early 1960s with study after study after study. Even though that's very surprising to people who assume that, of course, rewards motivate people and therefore they do their best. That's not what the data show. In businesses in particular, no research, to the best of my knowledge, has ever shown a long-term enhancement of the quality of work as a result of any kind of bonus plan, merit pay, pay for performance, or incentive plan. Now notice I qualify that pretty carefully. You can sometimes get a short-term enhancement in the quantity of work, but as far as I can tell, looking at decades of research, no incentive plan in any corporation or other organization has ever been shown to enhance the long-term quality of work. Despite that, of course, incentives are used in the vast majority of American corporations. It's like the average American company is like a giant Skinner box with a parking lot. And in my work, I have shown what the research does find, and I won't break that down now, but I'd be glad to. For now, you'll have to take my word for it. But in my book, Punished by Rewards, and in all my books, I have lengthy bibliographies so that you can look up the original sources. Now, there are some cases where rewards are not merely ineffective, they are counterproductive. They undermine exactly what we're trying to promote. I'll give you two examples. Two studies, one at the University of Arizona and the other at the University of Toronto, have found that children who get rewarded by their parents for various things, positive reinforcement, tend to be less caring and generous than other children. And the result is most pronounced if you reward or praise kids for being generous. If you say to a child, "Good job, Diane. I really like the way you shared your cookie with Belinda. You're such a caring person. Good for you." She just became a little more selfish as a result of that and will be less likely to share in the future when there's no one around to give her a patronizing pat on the head for it. The other example has to do with learning in the classroom, and particularly effective grades, which are a form of reward and at the same time a form of punishment. By the way, notice that rewards and punishments are not opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, and that coin doesn't buy very much. I'll say more about that in a moment. But if you look at all of the research done with grading, especially when some kids are told this is going to count for a grade and the other kids given the same assignment have no grade involved, you tend to find three effects of giving kids grades. And by kids, I mean everyone from elementary school to graduate school. A, they tend to do a poorer job at the learning. They're less likely to remember facts as long and less likely to think deeply. That is, grades, the more you grade kids and get them focused on a good report card, the more superficial their learning tends to be. B, they tend to pick the easiest possible task if you give them a choice, not because they're lazy, but because they're rational. The kid would say, duh, as soon as you told me the point here is to get a better grade, of course I'm going to pick the shortest book or the easiest project, because the goal is not to understand or take intellectual risks. It's to avoid risks. Because the easier the thing I'm doing, the better the chance I can give you what you seem to want, mom, dad, teacher, which is not quality of learning. It's a better grade. And so those two tend to pull in opposite directions. And the third effect, C, is that when you give kids grades, all else being equal, they will tend to be less interested in the learning, in the specific topic, in the discipline like math or writing, and in learning itself. To the best of my knowledge, every study that has ever looked at the effects of grades on motivation to learn has found a negative effect. And that's a very powerful point. That's why the best teachers in schools never give grades. They use alternative, non-destructive forms of assessment and evaluation. I'm going to take a breath here to notice that a moment ago I saw on my screen a couple of questions, and now they are gone. My slides have not changed.
Yeah, actually, those are just kind of administrative sorts of things. People were confused about slides.
Oh, got it. Is this an audio webinar only? Somebody says, I see, and the answer is yes. Okay, so you're not going to see changes in slides, and you're not going to see me, except for a picture. All right, good. Okay, so that's the end of what I wanted to say by way of my first part, which is what does the research show about rewards in general? At best, rewards are ineffective at anything beyond getting temporary compliance. And that's true in the classroom, in the family, in the workplace, and in other arenas. But more commonly, rewards, and I'll use that term interchangeably with incentives today, are actually counterproductive, where they undermine the very thing that we're trying to achieve. Now we come to part two. Is the research any different where it comes to what you're interested in, I'm presuming, which is to say helping people to be healthier, to achieve something like wellness, to adopt a lifestyle where they're likely to be happier, live longer, and so on. Now, most of the studies that I have found here deal with two specific behaviors, which are helping people to quit smoking and helping them to lose weight. I found some early studies on this that I included in my book on rewards, which was first published in 1993. But for a presentation I gave at a national conference on health promotion about 2 years ago, I went back and looked at all the newer research. Now, I don't want to belabor this here by describing in detail every study. I'm going to give you a very abridged version of this, but I am going to also point you to where on my website I describe each of these studies, as well as the original citations, so you can go look at the studies themselves. I'll just give you the overview on smoking. The best overview that I see, and the most recent one, was done by something called the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, where they look at all kinds of issues. In 2008, they looked for all rigorous controlled studies of helping people to quit smoking, including a variety of different methodologies. They found 17 that met their standards and reported that, quote, none of the studies demonstrated significantly higher quit rates for the incentives group than for the control group beyond the 6-month assessment. They continue, smokers may quit while they take part in a competition or receive rewards for quitting, but do no better than unassisted quitters once the rewards stop. That is consistent with other overviews I found, There were a couple of studies that seemed to find positive effects and were picked up immediately by the media, but turned out to be very poorly designed. One was done at IBM 3 years ago, another with the Philadelphia VA, and I'm happy to tell you why I think those studies don't challenge the overall conclusion. But what's interesting, if we're looking at the smoking cessation research, is that the best studies find not just that incentives don't work, but that they're worse than doing nothing at all. Just like I've argued, rewards tend to have that effect in general in other arenas as well. Now, when I say the best studies, I mean sometimes by their methodology, their, for example, random assignment of people to different conditions, which tends to make more sense, but also because a lot of the studies, there's only two conditions. Either you get a reward for quitting smoking, or nothing happens to you at all. The better studies have other substantive interventions where they try to help people quit smoking using different techniques. And then they have some people who get those other strategies with and without reward, so you can really see what's going on. So, for example, a study reported in the American Journal of Health Promotion in 1998, very large study at 3 work sites, had this big multi-component program with a self-help package and small group support and monthly phone counseling. And some people got all that stuff, and some people got all that stuff with also an incentive for quitting. It turned out, and they used big incentives, by the way. They gave them a lot of money to really make an impact. And they found that there was no advantage when they got the incentives, but in fact, it tended to be counterproductive, and that they had to actually counsel the people to undo the damage done by the incentives in order to emphasize self-control and confidence building, because otherwise the people who got the incentives attributed whatever success they might have been having at quitting smoking to the reward rather than having an intrinsic commitment to that. One more on smoking before I move, and this one I actually have my one and only slide for. Michaela, do you actually have that to put up? The one that I sent you? There we go.
Yes, I do. There it is.
I appreciate it. I'm not a big slide person, as I suppose you can tell. This study was done by Windsor and colleagues, published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine. And I'm trying to minimize the other stuff so I can look at it. There we go. So if everyone can see this here, let me decode this for you. The A condition that you see, the 3 little bars on the left side, thank you, is people who just got the self-help manual. And the 3 bars represent the checking in to see if they had still quit smoking after 6 weeks, after 6 months, and after a year. The next group of bars is the people who got that self-help manual and they got money. Now we're on the second one, C. Right. And those people got an incentive as well. And as you can see, if you look at what counts, which is where they were at a year, there's a slightly lower quit rate as a result of getting the incentive compared to, that's the blank or white bar compared to the white bar in the A group. So the incentive didn't help, it seemed to hurt. But what's interesting is what you see in the next ones, what happened when they got self-help manual and what's called social enhancement, which is a bunch of other skill training kinds of interventions. And you can compare what happens there. That seemed to help a lot. And then finally you look at the D group at the end, and then they added a monetary incentive, so they got the whole deal. And as you can see, adding an incentive made matters worse, actually reduced the effectiveness of other forms of intervention. And this is not a quirky, unusual study. It's consistent with what has been found in other ways as well. So that's the research that I can see on, I'm just showing you one study, but I'm referring to overviews that deal with many other studies on smoking cessation. The other major a question that's been asked in the research on health promotion and wellness is helping people to lose weight. And basically what we find is, to summarize this quickly, because I don't want this to be a boring academic seminar, and you can read my summaries of all the studies on my website, and you can then, if you really want, go to a university library and look up the original research if you're really motivated. And basically what we find is same thing. At best, incentives just get people to lose weight for as long as the incentive keeps coming, and sometimes not even then. And at worst, it makes things worse. One of the early studies on this, done back in the 70s, had people weighing in twice a week. And after the treatment period, the control subjects lost an average of 3.5 pounds. The people who got a reward for losing weight gained 6 pounds. And that was a small study, but what came since then really hasn't helped. There was a lot of media attention in late 2008 to a study published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which turned out to be a pretty poor study. There were only 19 people in each condition. It was almost all men and so on. But the bottom line was that there were no significant differences at final follow-up. And that's what the best overview we have on this topic also shows. One little postscript here in terms of health and wellness stuff is there is a bunch of studies that were done on something beyond weight loss and smoking cessation, and that is using your seat belts. So a behaviorist named Scott Geller in Virginia reviewed 28 programs used by 9 companies, nearly 500,000 vehicle observations over 6 years. And it turned out that programs that rewarded people for wearing their seat belts were the least effective over the long haul. And he was not happy about this because this is a guy who is ideologically committed to a behaviorist model of dangling goodies in front of people and then varying the incentives, a sort of religion of behaviorism here rather than a hypothesis. But what was really kind of amusing is that 2 years later, in another journal, Geller was writing about the issue and wrote that incentive strategies had been particularly promising as a method of increasing safety belt use. And then he cited that very review that he had published a couple of years earlier, apparently hoping nobody would look it up and discover what he actually found. So some people are so committed to the idea of using incentives that they will misrepresent or ignore or forget, to use the most charitable explanation, what the findings show, in some cases one's own finding. And at this point now, having quickly gone over research about rewards in general and rewards in the field of health promotion, I want to try to make sense of these results and come back to what might lead to this. It looks like there's 2 people, by the way, Michaela, who have asked for that slide, the one of the study.
Yep.
Put back up. So if you choose to do that, that'd be fine.
Yep, I can do that, and I'll also make that PDF available on the site with the recording of your webinar as well, so people can grab it now, grab it later.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, and someone has asked, Emily O'Sullivan asked, what does social enhancement mean? That was a term that was used in that particular study to refer to a kind of skill training process. I would have to go back to the original to look at the specifics. What non-incentive interventions are used tend to vary from study to study. But that's what makes it even more powerful, that you get the same destructive effect from incentives regardless of what the specific substantive intervention is. And some people are asking about what constitutes an incentive. Would a discount for a health club count? I guess I wouldn't count that as an incentive unless it's offered contingently. If you give people a discount and say, we want to encourage you to use a health club, to work out, to take advantage of our facilities, that just seems like a nice offer. But if you say, you will get that discount only if you fulfill this condition, that's what turns, look, if I give you a sandwich, that's not a reward. If I give you a sandwich for having jumped through my hoops, for having answered test questions correctly or not missed a day this month at work, now I've taken something that is something we like, food, and I've turned it into a way of manipulating you. That's what makes it a reward. Love from a parent is not inherently a reward. It's only a reward if I turn on the love, the attention, and the approval when my child pleases me. Now it's not about hugs and smiles and caring. I've turned those things into a mechanism for control. That's what positive reinforcement is. It means you have to do what pleases or impresses me in order for me to hug you and love you and say, good job. And that, in some ways, is the most insidious reward of all. Because what kids need desperately, what all of us need, but especially children, is unconditional support and love, to be accepted for who we are, not for what we do, and to know that even when we screw up or fall short, our parents' approval and pride and love isn't diminished or turned off. So positive reinforcement, like good job, is by definition conditional acceptance. And thus not only doesn't give kids what they most need, it gives them the opposite, because the purpose is not to help kids become healthy people with high self-esteem who can function well. The purpose is to make them do what we want them to do. And that's why I suggest it's just the flip side of punishment. One of the nastiest forms of punishment of young children is forcibly isolating them when they most need us, which we refer to euphemistically as time out. What that really is a form of love withdrawal. And I discuss these issues as well as what is more effective in helping kids of all ages solve problems and become good people in one of my other books, which you saw flashed up there, the orange one, called Unconditional Parenting. Now, we come back to this question, which is basically, what the hell is going on here? Many of us in this culture have been led to accept the idea of incentives to the point that when we sit down to plan how to manage employees or how to help people achieve wellness, we don't even ask the question, you know, do rewards make sense? What does the research show? What are the alternatives to rewards? We already circumscribe the question so that we're asking, which incentives should we use? How should we plan these incentives? How should they be scheduled? How large should they be? Should we reward groups instead of individuals? Should we use money or should we use in kind? All of those questions. And there are many, many consulting firms out there where the premise is we're going to treat people like pets, in effect, although they don't put it that way, of course, by dangling the equivalent of a doggy biscuit in front of them, but we'll help you choose the doggy biscuit. We will find the best incentive plan. So people actually ask the question that way to begin with. How do we use, well, sometimes they even make up words that aren't English words, like how do we incentivize or incent people, which for me is like, as an English speaker, is like scraping nails on a blackboard, but that's a semantic quibble. But the question they're asking is, how should we dangle goodies in front of people? Instead of asking the question, why would we ever do this at all? Why would we use any incentive plan when the research overwhelmingly demonstrates that it's ineffective or counterproductive? So when I go through this research, which I do in different ways, not for health promotion people, for managers at large corporations, for teachers and school administrators and for parents. And you'll notice that the same behaviorist, outdated, simplistic assumptions about motivating people with incentives plays out in different ways, but the same thing is present at work, at school, at home, and in the health club. Some people don't believe this. Some people, and you know what, I'm not sure what I can say other than to invite them to read the original research. Some people say, well, the problem is because you're not doing the incentives right, or you're not doing the right kind of incentives. And my question here is, how many different types of examples do you need showing failure, 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 failure before you say the problem is with the underlying theory of motivation? It's not with the details of implementation. And that leads to the third conclusion you can draw, that the problem is inherent. So anyway, let's go back to the achievement studies I mentioned very quickly. Why might it be the case that if you got 100 people together, gave them all some task to do, that the people not given any rewards are likely to outperform those who are given a reward? Well, I would be asking you to speak up and mention what you've thought of if I was in the room with you, but instead I will let you know what I've thought of, or what other researchers have proposed, or what other people in other seminars that I've done have come up with. First, achievement tends to be lower because of the effects of rewards on relationships. Two kinds of relationships. The relationship among the people getting the reward, or the relationship between the person getting the reward and the person giving the reward. Let's take an ordinary workplace. When people tend to do well in what they feel is a caring community, a place where collaboration is expected and encouraged. But if I'm trying to get some goodie, I am not focused on helping the people around me and building community and effective teamwork. I'm just focused on what I'm going to get. The worst form of reward is an award. The worst form of reward or incentive is one that's made artificially scarce, so that there's a limited number to go around, and if I get one, you can't, or at least you're less likely to. In other words, what I'm describing is the most toxic possible arrangement in any environment, competition, where you and I are working at cross purposes, and I have to want you to fail in order for me to succeed. So it's bad enough to offer people some kind of goodie if they lose weight or quit smoking or buckle up or go to the health club more. That's bad for all the reasons I've been rambling about now for half an hour. But far worse, the worst possible thing to set up is a contest in which some people have to triumph over other people in order to succeed. Never mind the cheating, the aggression, the nastiness that show up. The reality is this is the most toxic possible extrinsic inducement, the one where I see other people as obstacles to my own success. It's not about success for all of us. It's not even about success for me. It's about winning, which is very different than that. But then there's the relationship between the person giving the reward and the person getting it. And here I would say that an incentive-driven workplace is one where I have an inducement to pretend I have everything under control because I'm trying to kiss up to the boss or impress her. And that doesn't lead to problems being solved. A second reason that achievement declines when people are trying to get an incentive is because this whole approach is based on behavior. I know an organization is in trouble the more times I hear that word spoken. The more you focus on people's behavior, the more likely it is you're going to use some carrot or stick to try to change their behavior. What we're really interested in, and this is at least as true in the field of health promotion and wellness as it is anywhere, are the reasons, the motives, the values under the surface that inform people's behavior. But the reasons and motives and the people who have them are ignored because we're just stuck on the surface, saying if you engage in this behavior, you'll receive that incentive. And that represents a thin and totally inadequate approach to human psychology, one close to what we call behaviorism. That's why you tend to get only short-term effects, and you're staying at the surface. Third reason is that you discourage risk-taking. Now I'm talking about not quitting smoking. I'm talking about why it is that people don't think as deeply or clearly when they're trying to get an A or a bonus or something like that. It's because you tend to go in the most stereotypical route possible to avoid risk in order to maximize your chance of getting the reward. Whereas when you don't have rewards, people are more likely to take chances, to play with possibilities, and to be creative. Now, the last reason I think that explains this is probably the biggest one of all. And if you just woke up or you just finished your lunch and you're starting to pay attention and all you get out of this hour is what I'm about to say, I'm a happy guy. And that is the following. When you say we want to motivate people to do something, motivate my kid to read or to be nice to people, motivate my clients to treat their bodies with respect, and help them develop healthier ways of living, we are acting as if there is a single thing called motivation, a single entity. You can have a lot of it or you can have a little of it. It's like on a hydraulic lift. It can go up or it can come down. But the reality is that there are different kinds of motivation, and the type is much more important than the amount. Many of you may already be familiar with the nomenclature I'm about to mention, and that is the distinction between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is a fancy term for you do something because you get a kick out of doing it, because you find it fulfilling and gratifying in its own right, whether that's working out or helping someone or doing math. Extrinsic motivation is basically a reward or a punishment where I'm motivated not by the task or activity itself, but by what it leads to outside the activity, getting the reward. It's not just that these two things are different. It's not even just that intrinsic is better. It's that intrinsic motivation tends to be undermined by extrinsic motivators. Let me say the same thing in a different way. The more you reward people for doing something, the more they tend to lose interest in whatever they had to do to get the reward. And the bigger the reward, the more damaging the effect on intrinsic motivation. If you want to kill a child's interest in reading, the most effective way to make that kid a non-reader is to give that kid a prize for reading a book, to use a program where kids get points or treats or privileges or pizza or something, because now they come to see the reading as a tedious prerequisite to getting the goodie. In other words, you've devalued the thing itself because it comes to be seen as something I've got to do, got to get over with in order to get the goodie. And that's exactly the way people come to look at healthy behaviors. If you give them an incentive for it, they are actually less committed to engaging in those activities and that lifestyle than they were before, and less committed than people who are not treated like pets to begin with. The other reason that intrinsic motivation tends to go down when you give people rewards for doing something is because rewards are, to quote two of the leading researchers in this field, Ed Deasy and Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester, rewards are control through seduction. Or to put it differently, rewards, just like punishments, are ways of doing things to people rather than working with people. The best counselors, the best psychologists, the best trainers, the best consultants in any field have to figure out ways of getting better at working with people. Any kind of incentive, any kind, is a way that takes away with one hand all the good you're doing with the other. And that's what the research shows about smoking and weight loss and other fields, because that's a doing to approach. And you cannot fix the problem by tweaking the incentive plan, because all incentives are based on an outmoded theory of human psychology, a simplistic view of motivation. So then the question now is, what can we do? Now the reason I've spent, someone is complaining about this, the reason I've spent so much time on this is, first of all, because I know the research a lot better, and second, because there are many people, very qualified, some of them listening today, about ways of helping people to get healthier. But we have to begin by repudiating, by leaving behind the use of rewards and the whole behaviorist premise. So if I spent 10 minutes on this and went on to chatter about what might help instead, I think a lot of people would not be persuaded. So this is a whole webinar series where I'm assuming that almost every other hour is spent with people who are helping you think about how to achieve wellness or help people achieve wellness. My modest contribution, if I have one, is to say it is at least as important to focus on what not to do, especially when that practice and that theory is so pervasive, and to spend the time trying to figure this out. Now, the reasons that rewards fail so consistently may point us to more promising alternatives, even if I don't have the answer here, and I probably don't. That doesn't challenge the critique of incentives or justify continuing to use them. But here's what makes sense to me. Now, I'll just say this in very brief terms, and then maybe some people want to speak up and, in addition to the questions they've been writing, talk about this. But basically, here's if I had another hour, what I would try to address and ask you about. First, you want to help people get healthier. You have to address the underlying life and psychology issues and move beyond behavior. You need deeper, that is to say what but also broader, which is to say social and economic analyses for why people overeat, why they smoke, what external stresses are in their lives, what pressures to be thin, how corporate marketing tries to get us to act in unhealthy ways. Jonathan Robeson at the Michigan Center for Preventive Medicine, a doctor who focuses on these issues, puts it this way. In health promotion, people's unhealthy behaviors, smoking, drinking, overeating, not exercising, often represent coping strategies for some kind of underlying distress caused by fear, loss, pain, or other stress-related issues. The use of rewards to control or suppress these symptoms can alter behaviors in the short term, but does not address underlying sources of distress. And this not only minimizes the chances of long-term success, but often leads to a cycle of repeated failure that can have significant negative health effects and may exacerbate the original problem. Jonathan Robeson's newer work focuses on more holistic approaches that see health problems in context and considers meaning of life issues. You know, how do we help people live healthy, satisfying lives instead of how do we help people stop smoking or start exercising? That's the first. The second thing is rewards don't work in part because they are experienced as controlling. We have to do more than stop the rewards. We have to actively enhance autonomy, self-efficacy. We have to help people. You know, the way in drug treatment centers, there's often a motivational interview where you try to elicit from people their reasons and their plans instead of just giving it to them. give people more say. Now, I've written a lot about this, so have a number of other people, how in nursing homes, in hospitals, in schools, people tend to be most successful when they are given more choice, more say about their lives. We need, as consultants, I'll summarize this in 4 words: talk less, ask more. And there are different ways that might play out. The third and last thing I would say, by way of an alternative framework, a way of working with people to help them become healthier as an alternative to rewards, is to emphasize relationships, community, social networks, which is exactly what competition kills, of course. A lot of traditional healthcare is based on the assumption that we're acting on discrete, separate individuals. But the reality is, it works. We all know that people are likely to do things together. The Framingham Heart Study found that weight gain was affected by social networks. And newer research suggests that weight loss can happen more effectively when couples or friends do it together. There's also some research with kids involving drug use and the benefits of a sense of community in a school environment on reducing substance abuse. There's only a very few minutes left. What should I do here? Should I invite people to speak up?
Okay.
Literally, or should I start looking more carefully at the questions that are written?
Well, Rosie, do you want to sort of take the written questions, and while you're working through those, if people want to raise their hand?
Yeah, that's a quick question. Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I apologize that went on for so long. Okay, here's one I see from Ethel Manley. Is there an instance where using an incentive can be used effectively? I've never seen evidence of that. I think the best we can hope for with an incentive is that it doesn't do too much damage. So therefore, we should put our efforts into trying to figure out alternatives to this. Am I familiar with a Dutch lottery system where rewards are randomly given to people who completed a task, so it's not competitive? I know of the concept. I wasn't familiar with that, calling it a Dutch lottery system. My quick reaction is it might be slightly less destructive than a traditional reward system, but I don't see the benefit. Either the stuff people get in the lottery, the rewards, don't matter to them. They don't care about them, in which case, why do this? Or it does matter, in which case people are going to be disappointed or even resentful when they don't get it. So either way, I would put the money and the effort into something other than any kind of reward system. Can I address behavioral economics, asks Gary Sams, in light of my position. Behavioral economics is the new sexy form of economics that acknowledges that we're not, as the neoclassical economists used to think, perfectly rational decision makers, and uses more subtlety in understanding the things that motivate us. But behavioral economics, with respect to the issues I'm talking about, is no more advanced, in my opinion, than traditional economics, because it's still based on a thoroughly behaviorist notion where they ask the question, which incentives should we use, instead of acknowledging that all incentives are inherently flawed. Am I familiar, asks Kristen Crosby, with motivational interviewing? Yeah, I just mentioned that, as a matter of fact. I don't know enough about it to be able to suggest which types work better, and I don't know data on it, but what I've seen suggests that it is a working with strategy when it's done right, as long as incentives are not scotch taped to it. William McPeck asks, if the competition is team-based, how is this a demotivator to the individual? In that situation, if it's us against them, the demotivation is multiplied by the number of people in the group, because now the only cooperation that's going on is for us to figure out how we can triumph over that other group. It's still a win-lose situation, and so in most respects it ends up being at least as damaging. Ultimately, what we want is cooperation within groups and between and among groups, as opposed to cooperation as a means toward the end of victory. When offering a wellness program where incentives are tied to biometric screenings, would I consider this type of incentive effective or ineffective? Karen Presley asks. This is a subset of a broader question. Can we use incentives just to get people to show up, to get the screening, to become part of the program? The evidence on this is mixed, frankly. Some programs find that you can bribe people to show up to get it done. I'm deliberately using a pejorative term here. And other people find, even for participation, the rewards are not particularly effective, at least not as compared to other less manipulative ways of doing it. So if there's a better way of doing it, I certainly would, but I would then, even if you are going to do that, immediately drop out any kind of incentive, because now the hard work begins of helping people to act on what the screening finds, or to take advantage of the resources you're providing to people. And their rewards, as I keep saying, get in the way. And that's related to the...
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I wanted to make sure that Rosie had an opportunity to
Sure.
ask questions before we ran out of time, because there certainly are. Once the questions started coming, they just kept coming.
Yeah.
Rosie?
Yeah, no, I think, looking at the questions, it's the general gist of, well, then how do you, and I think the one that I get all the time is when you have companies who have been doing wellness with incentives, because if you look at the research on, once you have an incentive in place, you need the contingent rewards, but yet if you take it away, what do you do? So there's some questions about, well, if the culture's already used to it, and I agree, because people will go through the motions, but you get an unintended consequence of engagement dropping and then being pissed off at the company. But so if you have organizations who are already doing this very heavy incentive base, especially tied to health plan, you got to do X, Y, Z, how do you start to migrate them out of that? It's one thing if they've never gone that way, but if they've been doing that, how do you start to migrate them away from that without having detrimental consequences?
Right. I just want to be clear here as we come up on 1 o'clock. Can we go over a couple of minutes? It's not like we're going to lose our connection.
Oh, no. Well, we certainly can go over.
We'll try to wrap it up, and Rosie, if you're going to want to say more, I've been obviously monopolizing this, and we'll invite you. You may have a better answer to your own question than I do. I will say, I think you're absolutely right. If you've been treating people like pets by offering them extrinsic incentives, and then you suddenly yank them away, people are not going to say, yay, hooray, now we can be intrinsically motivated. Part of the reason is because they've gotten addicted to the extrinsics. Part of the reason is because if you want to move from a doing to framework to a working with framework, that very transition has to be done in a working with way. Otherwise, basically, you're doing rewards to people, and then you're doing the abolition of rewards to people. And that violates people's need to feel autonomous and bought in and invested in part of the decision making. So I would begin by not just saying we're starting next week, we're not going to do the incentives because we've seen the light and gotten religion. Rather, we would ask people about their experience with the incentives and share the summaries of research, such as what I've been offering, and invite people to think about why we might have been going in the wrong direction, and let's think about what might work instead. By the way, for any of you who are interested in what I've been saying and want to share this stuff with other people, with colleagues, for example, on my website there is a short article that I wrote a couple of years ago for USA Today. It can't get more accessible than that. That summarizes what I've just been telling you for the last hour. And if you click on the link at the end of that article, it will take you to a study-by-study synopsis that reviews the health research in particular. So I can, if you can't find that on it's on the articles page of my website. If you can't find it, you can write to me, care of my website, again, alfiekohn.org, and I will point you to that. And you have my permission to copy and distribute that article if you want. And of course, if you want more depth, the book Punished by Rewards provides it that goes beyond the question of just health and wellness. But I think whenever we talk about screenings and getting exercise and eating in a healthy way, you can't evaluate the research and arguments there without looking at the broader context of what research and theory and practice have found about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and the destructive effects of rewards more generally, which is why I began by talking about family, classroom, and workplace examples. I'm
Great.
sorry if you had questions, some of you, that I was not able to get to or answer adequately, but I hope I have offered you not just another specific technique that you can scotch tape to the status quo. If I've made you feel a little disoriented, a little unsettled, I've made you gulp because things, if you take this seriously, would have to be done very differently, then I'm pleased. Because my goal here is not just to be thought-provoking, but to be change-provoking. That's what you do for a living, too, is to help people consider change. But to do that, we have to ask the root questions, which involve challenging the theory of motivation on which many of our traditional interventions are based.
Very well said. Rosie, do you have any closing remarks? I really appreciate you being here to help me with this. Alfie, you're so very...
No, I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it was awesome too. Alfie, you're so much more self-sufficient than, well, not everyone, but certainly many, many people.
That's a polite way of saying I've monopolized the conversation, and I apologize for that.
No, not at all, not at all. But, you know, this is an incredibly complex issue. It's controversial, and I guess along those lines, I should say that Rosie and I are working on some case study materials that we'll have along these lines of not using incentives and how people have managed to do that, so that we'll have some more on this topic coming up. And also, I've got, in a few months, I'll have Dan Pink for your, the author of Drive, for your consideration. And I appreciate you so much, Alfie, for agreeing to do this today. Your wonderful insights and your ability to make people kind of squirm in their chair a little bit. That really is what it's all about, you know.
Thank you. Oh, and somebody just tagged up a question, the name of the article, the one that summarizes all of this. I found it on my own website, as you can, or you can just Google it. The title is Cash Incentives Won't Make Us Healthier.
Aha. Okay. Well, super.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Rosie. Thanks for your help. Everyone, thanks for being here. See you again soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.